Now, the first presentation is by Miguel Pacheco, who's a Navy officer, and he is presently the technical director of the Portuguese Hydrographic Institute. In addition to his regular military training and degrees, he also holds master degrees in surveying engineering, in geographic information systems, and in maritime history. So, you know, very broad training and education in many topics. He was lecturer at the Naval School for some years and has also collaborated as lecturer in other universities in Portugal. He has, you know, a list of publications, and it is truly a pleasure in having Commander Pacheco today here with us. The topic is unveiling the geographic grid on latitude charts. So please, Commander Pacheco, you know, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Henrique. Thank you very much and for presenting me. Unfortunately, I have to be on uniform. I'm at work and with the eyes crossing through the workshop, and I was able, of course, to follow some of the presentations, not all, but I want, first of all, to congratulate the organization of the workshop. I know it's been a fight to make it happen. It was supposed to be here at the Hydrographic Institute. Unfortunately, we have to go virtual, but I also believe that virtual has some good points on it. With that, I will start by sharing my screen. Let me see if I can do it. I believe it's available now, right? Okay, so my talk is on the implicit geographic grid on latitude charts. I'm not, you know, to this kind of audience, I'm not going to go through the evolution of the nautical chart, these three big buckets where we can put the nautical charts from the 13th century up to the 17th century. But my focus will be on the latitude or Portuguese chart. I like to call it also the Portuguese chart. And I would like to start by expressing to you what is my view regarding, you know, the uncertainties and what normally some people, when they talk about these charts, they assume to be kind of errors on the chart. I don't believe the charts have any errors. Saying this, it just means that each chart has its own design algorithm. Sometimes they have multiple algorithms inside the same chart. It really depends on the size and the area coverage. We've seen that, but it's actually, we see a consistency. It's consistent to have multiple charts from a certain type to have the same characteristics. So there's really no error on those charts. I believe what we call errors are just the difference we notice between the design algorithm and the navigation methods that are used that then generate the kind of differences that we call errors. And these differences are really related to several things. It's because the cartographer makes the charts using some science that, for example, sailors or pilots are not completely aware of them, and that generates a lot of confusion when it's used. These are two people with different backgrounds. Cartographers are much more educated. They are sometimes mathematicians, geographers, while the pilots sometimes they don't even know how to read. They learn on the job, and so they have different backgrounds on using the chart, and that creates those kind of errors. It's not the only cause, I would say. It's also the limitations that the nautical instruments have at each time that are not really able at some point to fit on all the requirements of a nautical chart to be precise on the positioning. So I call these kind of errors just the characteristics of the chart. If you know them, probably you won't make that much of a problem. And in our job, I mean, people who study ancient cartography, what we have been doing is, with the help of some manuals, actually try to do reverse engineering of how these charts were made, and then try to figure out what really was their characteristics. Another concept I would like to talk about is, how do we sailors go from point A to point B? We do have two major ways of doing it. Either we go through the orthodrome, that would be the line with the shortest distance between 2 points on Earth, or we follow the loxodrome. It's not the shortest distance between 2 points, but it's the easiest one for us sailors to use. So in an orthodrome, the problem is that you have to keep changing course to go through the minimum length way between 2 points. And that is really problematic. You have to know more or less at each location, what is your latitude, what is your longitude, and then what is the next course for the next segment. So you have to keep changing the course. It's a nightmare for planning, and it's a nightmare for execution. So we don't like orthodrome. With today's technology, it's easier to do it, but we still don't use it. Only aircraft do it in transcontinental flights. Other than that, we prefer to go straight line. It's easier for us because the main instrument to go from point A to point B is the compass and the gyro compass. So going on a straight line for us, it's easier. Even if we had to calibrate due to meteorological or oceanographic conditions, it's fine. We'll just set a new point, new direction, and we keep the same track. So going through those types of charts, Portland chart was kind of a Cartesian reference system on it, because it was mainly based on distances and directions. It uses more or less the same scale all around. Directions are drawn on maps with the roses. It's really not a bad system for the Mediterranean and for the precision that the sailors needed to use at that time, and that they could do. So it's not bad if you are in an area limited region, is essential going on the longitude horizontal, and with not much difference in vertical, in latitude. Then we had the latitude charts, or the Portuguese charts. It's really an upgrade of the Portland charts, induced by the ocean-going voyages. It adds the latitude grid, and it's also not so bad if you are going for long north-south voyages. And then we have the diamond of the chart. It's the reduced chart that really solves all problems of matching the design algorithm with the tools and the way we prefer to do navigation. It's almost a match between the two, and so we use it still today. I produce them here at the office still today. And then we have something called the square chart. And the square chart went through a discussion for some time. And then I believe Joaquin just nailed it a few years ago with a paper that really said it all. So why am I bringing it here? I might have just a little thing that I could add to what was called the square chart. Is it a variation of the latitude chart? Well, first of all, where did it got its name from? The name comes from the treat from Pedro Nunes, the defending the nautical chart and its characteristics, when pilots were complaining that with those kinds of charts, they would always be sometimes, missing directions and not reaching the right positions and everything. And so Pedro Nunes explained it at some point that, well, these charts are good. You just have to know how they are made. And he called them, and I have the translation to English that says that knowing these degrees of parallels and different latitudes are in reality smaller than the chart for being square. That's where it got its name. Shows and realize how much less leads they have, and this by tables of numbers or instruments. Better use we have on the chart by keeping directions as straight and equidistant lines, so as it is, keep it square. I would say, let's put this in the language of today. Although there is in fact meridians convergence to the pole, it's better to keep meridians and parallels represented as straight perpendicular lines so that we keep directions also represented as straight and equidistant lines. And the reason is because we sailors, we do our planning much better if we could use straight lines for setting the course and then to make it happen at sea. This is the main reason. And so the square chart is, if we took it as some authors were thinking about what the square chart was, the closest we have, of course, is the plate carré projection, is, where the degree of meridians and parallels have exactly the same length. And the problem is, if you look, I've put some circles and some directions on a GIS using, the 3D model there. And when you set it to a plane chart, if those circles become distorted or if the directions become curved, it's not good for navigation. And this was, again, very well explained by Joaquin in the past, but I'm showing you an image. And I say clearly, especially if you look to the image, let me see if you see my mouse over here, to this image over here, you start to see at our latitude, if our reference of origin is the equator, the circles start to have, some deformation, and the same with the directions. So plate carré is terrible for navigation, except if you are in the equator. If I want to go from São Tomé and Príncipe to the northern Brazil area, it's fine. I can use it for navigation. Other than that, it's terrible. And at this time, we are actually going north-south, not really east-west. So it's really out of logic. And this is what came out at some point from the interpretation of some authors of what was a square chart. Because they would see the equator graduated exactly the same as the meridian of reference graduated, they would say there's a grid there. And so this is a square chart. It isn't. First of all, technically, all that it's over there, the fact that the equator is graduated equally to the meridian, it's fine. Technically, it's correct because these are both maximum circles. They have more or less the same length to a degree, both on the longitude and the latitude. So, but the cartographers really didn't impose a square grid over there. They couldn't. And if you look at the map, actually, it's all based still on rhumb lines and distances. So the basic of the map is still the traditional latitude chart. The only problem is, so why did cartographers move from a non-gridded equator, just a line, to a gridded one? What was the reason? And that is actually explained by Manuel Pimentel. He's clear about it. He says, though longitudes resulting from this technique are wrong, and when he says this, is if you look at the latitude, longitude of landmarks and coastline, then it's wrong. If marked like this, it's easier to assess its quality. Who is assessing the quality? Cartographers. Why? Because they do a lot of replicas of maps. So if they have a reference of an equator who has also agreed, they can look at the marks and see if it's resemble the previous copies of charts. But more than that, it says it's easier to mark the point where the ship is. So this is wonderful for pilots to log their position. If you are writing a diary and you need to say where your ship is, if you have a position, it's much easier to say it's on a mark with a certain latitude and where the longitude is 35 or 38 or 300. It's much easier. So it's intuitive and you can always reproduce. You don't have to be setting your position and logging your position based on distance and a direction to a certain landmark. So it's much easier to make reports out of it. And I do believe this is the reason why this equator line was gridded at some point. It's just artificial. Then I was looking at the implicit grids on the latitude charts. And what I noticed when I was doing my first experiments on this is that actually there was some meridian conversions. And I was expecting some, but I was not sure. And I was starting to wonder, why would we really see conversions of the meridians in these charts? But my first test here, I only had like 3 points on the west side of the Atlantic. So I wanted to cover the whole Atlantic. I wanted to have land on both sides, Europe and Americas, so that I can really have a good interpolation for the implicit grid. As you can see, there is a convergence of the meridians towards the North Pole. And I tested with a different chart with more points that I could use to georeference the chart. And I see again some convergence of the meridians. Is it 2-time luck? Let's go for the third one. So we have a map that goes north to south. And I see a good distribution again of landmarks to be georeferenced. And I see meridian convergence both to the South Pole and to the North Pole. And to try to understand why this was happening, I was looking at the characteristics of what would be a grid chart. In this case, a plat carré, simple. If you pick at the equator 10 degrees of longitude, that gives you a distance of about 600 nautical miles. If you go up north, and if you want to have distances marked correctly, what happens is for the same 600 nautical miles, you cover a much larger area in terms of degrees of longitude. So this means that actually if you don't change the scale as you go up in latitude, what happens is that the grid itself will start to narrow towards the North Pole. And for these charts to have convergence of meridians, one thing was needed, that they would use the same scale, both at the reference, could be the equinoctial or the equator level, and up north. And again, we have Manuel Pimentel in 1699 explaining how they would build these charts. And he was saying, landmarks, capes, and islands were not drawn based on high latitude leagues, so they wouldn't change the scale, but by leagues of the equinoctial scale in their true distance, bearing, and latitude that experience as shown. So the fact that these charts, they didn't really change the scale as they were growing in latitude, made the existence of the implicit grid convergence to the pole. Now, following some research and testing more charts, then I've noticed again, I knew this chart. This is Pedro Reinel from 1502, I believe. And besides having the regular latitude, the meridian grid, he would also have a tilted meridian close to the shore in Newfoundland. And the scale of this meridian is exactly the scale of the vertical one. The colors, the fact is that the colors change here at every half degree. Over here, they change at every degree. So it seems that it's a different scale, but it's not. It's exactly the same scale. So then why was it tilted? And what would be the need? And if you think about it, if you have here, if you follow my mouse, imagine this is the reference meridian here with 10 degrees of latitude here. And if you start doing estimating or getting the latitude of a position in Newfoundland up north, set it to 0. And if you go to a position B, because this is almost vertically, if you put it again on point B, and if you see that the difference in latitude between point A and point B is 10 degrees, but the vertical scale gives you 9, not 10, the only way you have to make it 10 is by starting tilting this scale up to a point where you have your 10 degrees on the right latitude that you measure for point B. This is how I believe they were doing the angle. Another option is this was because they were feeling there was a problem with magnetic declination. I went through the models of magnetic declination in this for this time, and the models say magnetic declination maybe about 12 degrees, and the tilt of this meridian of this scale is actually 25. So I decided to look at other. I decided to try and impose the grid on this chart, and what I've noticed is that the convergence of meridians is really fitting the tilt angle of this meridian. Could be by chance, because I only have 2 really good points over here to do my interpolation. If I tested with another chart, a lot of points, also a tilted meridian over here, and it does match again the convergence of the meridians for that area with the points that I have. Another try. This is the worst case that I got. I don't think it really fits. It might be because of this point over here that I believe it's a good point. It might not be. This is the only case where it didn't really fit the inclination of this tilted meridian with the convergence of the meridians. Another example. Also, I see some correlation between the tilted angle and the tilted meridian next to it. The same over here. And to wrap up, so I would say, first of all, for the square chart, the graduated equator, it was just an artificial tool for position log. That's my opinion. I don't see any other use, and of course, for the cartographer to quality control the chart. Regarding the implicit grid on latitude charts, I do believe there is a meridian convergence, both by the testing that I've made and by what is written on how the charts were made. Regarding the tilted meridian on the charts, I don't think it's tilted because of the magnetic declination. This is suggested by some authors at some point in time. I don't think it is. Does it follow meridian conversion? I would say most probably it does. It's inclination set by the latitude differences, the technique that I've shown you that could be used to see how much should it be tilted. Most probably, but I don't have much assurances. So my talk is not very, I would say, giving you assurances of things I found. It's much more of raising questions to see if this is something you've come up also on your researches. So, and with this, I finish up my presentation. Now, of course, I'm available for discussion and then some questions that might
Thank you very much. We are really short on time. We would like to have a couple of minutes for discussion. I don't know if this will be possible, but so please, the floor now is open for questions and remarks. Thank you. So I see that Greg has raised his hand, so please, Greg.
Let me unmute. Yes, very good presentation. Thank you. And I think that's important that you are focusing on meridian convergence versus magnetic declination. That's a very interesting question. But I did want to comment on the one chart you showed, in which you said the tilted meridian scale did not seem to fit. I believe that's a 1587 Portuguese chart. The name I don't remember right now, but I would suggest some caution using that chart because the geographical depictions on it are derived from a printed, yes, that one, thank you. The geography is derived from a printed world map by Ortelius. I'm not sure exactly which one, but as you know, it went through many, many editions. My guess is it's at least after 1575. Anyway, so it looks like a nautical chart. It's drawn like a nautical chart, but the geography, and that is the points you're picking, are taken from a printed chart. So so it's not directly and hardly even indirectly based upon Portuguese navigational data. That's all I wanted to say.
Oh, thank you. Some hope that this error is actually something, it's good to see, and that there might be an explanation for this. Thank you very much.
Sure.
I think Joaquin has his hand raised, so please, Joaquin, another question. Yeah. You have to unmute yourself, Joaquin. We are not hearing you.
Okay. I think she made ahead of me because she raised her hand.
I'm sorry, because this...
Oh, no, not well. Well,
I was just clapping because I like the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Well, I have a long list of comments to make, but I won't make them, and I will leave that to the coffee break. Just two important points. Very good about that interpretation in Pimentel's. I agree that the longitudinal scale was used. Well, not in the very beginning, to locate positions, just like in a city plan, you use letters and numbers, something like that. But it doesn't start that way. The very reason for putting a longitude scale was Magellan's mission. Okay. It was on Kunstmann for chart, was a longitude scale was headed to show that the Moluccas were on the Spanish side. So that was the first chart to use longitude scale. Also, about the tilt of latitude scale, I don't agree with you. I really think it is due to magnetic declination, and also there are many charts with secondary latitude scale that are vertical, not tilted. And I shut up.
Okay.
Okay.
We have, just extra time for, oh yeah, Wolfgang, please. A quick comment or question, yes. But you have to unmute yourself. We are not hearing you. Wolfgang, we are not hearing you.
Yeah. Okay, I had problems finding the button to unmute you myself. Just one small comment. As far as I remember, Greg has shown in the Ponta Delgada meeting that the 1502 chart of Renel is not really 1502. Okay. And which probably fits in with Joachim's remark that the latitude scales were added to aid the Magellan expedition. That's it.
Okay, and Bruno, if you can make it in 30 seconds, it's okay. Otherwise, we have to move on.
I would just want to congratulate for the presentation. It spared me a lot of time in my own, but I also agree with Joaquim. And two things about the tilted scale, and I would like to see more points added to those maps. That thing that the comment that Greg made also is very important, but more points would be great. And also there are other charts that, as Joaquim said, have in this case the correct tilt. For instance, Gutierrez 1550, a chart that we presented in our series chart of the week. It's 22 something the tilt. So in that case, and like Joaquim showed, it's correct for the magnetic declination. But otherwise, very, very good. Congratulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think we need to proceed. And now we have the presentation by Gregory McIntosh. I don't believe that Greg requires too much of a presentation. But in any case, just to remind the basic facts, we all know Greg for many years. So Greg is presently a researcher at the Medea-Chart project. So he's been here in Lisbon for some years now. After a long and diversified professional career, then he started to work on cartographic matters, and he has a long and distinguished list of contributions, of which one should mention 4 books and many papers. But I think he's mostly known, but not only, but mostly known due to his work on the Piri-Reis map. So it is a pleasure having Greg, and he will talk about, was the Cavario planisphere copied or derived from the Cantino planisphere? Please, Greg.
Okay, I'm looking for a share button, share screen. I want this one. There we go. Trying to get to, boy, excuse me, I've got all sorts of, okay. Everything okay?
It's okay. It's
good.
Okay.
I will introduce the question of the relationship of the Cavario planisphere to the Cantino planisphere and discuss 2 definitions, take a look at the charts that were examined, present the variorium or collation of place names on the charts, propose some possible ways of considering the relationship, stomata, or family trees of the charts, particularly, of course, the Cantino and Cavario planispheres, and finally offer some conclusions and further considerations. First, the question of the relationship of the 2 planispheres. Since their independent rediscoveries in the 19th century, a close relationship has frequently been noted between the 2 nautical charts known as the Cantino planisphere of 1502 and the Cavario planisphere made sometime about 1503 to 1506. The considerable likeness in geography, place names, and inscriptions on the Cavario planisphere to the Cantino planisphere strongly suggests that Niccolò Cavari of Genoa either used the Cantino chart as his model or the two maps had very similar sources, perhaps the same single source planisphere. Excuse me. The Cantino planisphere is generally believed to be either a direct or derivative copy of the Padrão Real, the world chart and collection of associated charts kept in Lisbon that recorded the new discoveries of the Portuguese. There are important differences that indicate the Carvalho planisphere was made later than the Cantino planisphere. If the Carvalho planisphere was copied from, based upon, or derived from the Cantino, the later additions, such as the updated coast of Brazil and the introductions of toponyms from Marco Polo, point to additional secondary sources used by Nicola Cavalli, the Genoese mapmaker. The Cantino planisphere was transported from Lisbon to Genoa in November 1502, and thence to Ferrara. While in Genoa, perhaps it was copied by Cavalli. Seems reasonable. I used to think so, based upon some assumptions I had. But now, with more data from other contemporary charts, perhaps we can get closer to confirming or denying if the Carvalho planisphere is copied from or derived from the Cantino planisphere. The first definition to discuss is the word copy. What do we mean when we ask, was the Carvalho planisphere copied from the Cantino planisphere? There is a wide spectrum of meanings for the word copy, from a very strict sense as an exact replica to a rather loose definition that includes parody and fake. But as we're talking about manuscript documents, I am using the word copy as something such as derivative or descendant. A derivative work is a variation of an earlier work, transformed, recast, modified. It's a second separate work, a variation of an earlier work. Not to belabor the point too much, but I bring this up because misunderstandings often arise because the same words will be used but with different meanings. And we will do well to remember that we are talking about hand copying, which introduces variations, omissions, and additions. All copying involves the introduction of variations. To copy is to miscopy. I will add here from the previous speaker, I also object to the use of the word errors. I tend to think of them as variations. Another word to look at is Padrão Real. This is usually translated as the Royal Standard Map, Royal Model Map, Royal Pattern Map, or Royal Master Map, with the connotation of representing all the geographical knowledge at the time and of being the source or model from which other charts or maps are copied or derived. This master map is often understood to be a single planisphere or nautical chart of the world. It has also been understood to mean the collection of planispheres and associated charts, sketches, rudders, coastal views maintained by various Portuguese institutions at various times. I tend toward this latter meaning. A Portuguese world chart, however, such as we see in the Cantino planisphere, would not have been constructed until after the return of da Gama from India in the summer of 1499 or Cabral 2 years later. Look now at the charts that I examined. The coast of Africa from Cabo Verde to Rio do Infante in South Africa is a region, cartographically speaking, that is fairly stable in its depiction and place nomenclature. The Portuguese began bestowing their new place names in the middle of the 15th century and continued to the end of the century. We have some charts from the period. The place names are remarkably consistent, and they read essentially as a text that mapmakers and scribes copied over and over for decades. Comparing the text of the Carvalho planisphere to that of the Cantino planisphere and other Portuguese documents may answer whether the Carvalho was derived from the Cantino, or whether its text of place names is a separate manuscript transmission apart from the Cantino. The charts I have examined are the Raynel chart of about 1485 to 1492, the charts of the Canaro Atlas in London, believed to be copies of charts by Saliho, which in turn were copied from Portuguese charts, the Aguar chart, the earliest extant signed and dated Portuguese chart, the Kunstmann III chart of 1501 or a little later, now lost, but we have good photographs and a 19th century facsimile giving us the African names. And of course, the Cantino and Carvalho planispheres, the relationship between them being the subject of the present inquiry. Here are the examined charts and the number of African place names of each. Here are the coastlines these charts cover between Cabo Verde and Rio do Infante. The Aguar chart gives place names to Cape Coast. The Raynel chart down to the Congo River. The Canaro Atlas to Cabo de Santa Maria. And the Kunstmann III chart and the Cantino and Carvalho planispheres down to Rio do Infante. The place names on the charts. I have collated the place names on the selected charts into 518 lines of text. I will not, of course, go into each line, but will draw your attention to those points which address the question of whether the Carvalho planisphere was derived from the Cantino planisphere. For instance, here at line 16, we have a place name on the Carvalho planisphere matching that on the other charts, but missing from the Cantino. This seems to indicate that the Carvalho was not copied from the Cantino. That is, it was derived from the same pool of place names as the other earlier charts. Or alternatively, in this single instance, the Carvalho could have been copied from the Cantino, but with additional information from some other source. By the way, if you're wondering if the missing place name Rio de Casamansa on the Cantino planisphere was effaced or erased, a look at the Cantino shows that it was obviously never written on the parchment. There is no room for it. Here are a couple of more place names on the Carvalho planisphere matching those on the other charts, but are not on the Cantino. And some more. Again, I will not dwell on each. And more. This continues for the total of 518 lines of text on of these African names. In the 518 lines of text, there are 56 instances where the place name on the Carvalho planisphere matches the same place name on one or more of the other charts, but the place name is not on the Cantino. Here are the first 18, the next 18, and some more, and the final place names for the total of 56. These 56 place names on the Carvalho planisphere are 25%, a full quarter of the 225 place names on the Carvalho planisphere. This is an argument, perhaps a strong argument, for the Carvalho planisphere not being directly derived from the Cantino, but instead deriving its African place names from the same or similar sources as the other earlier charts, but through a different manuscript tradition or lineage. I'm digging a little deeper into the group of maps to see what else may be gleaned from them. Here are the quantities of toponyms shared by the charts. Again, I won't go into details here, just showing you the direction some of this work is going. They are expressed as percentages of each other. I note, however, that it may be possible to reconstruct the Padrão Real of about the year 1490 and another for the year of about 1504, possibly from these tables of place names. And because the shorter coasts on half of the charts, the comparisons of the three earlier charts to the later Kunstmann, Cantino, and Carvalho charts would have to be normalized. That is, the irrelevant place names would be excluded. For example, focusing on the place names that match the limited coastline on the Jaguar chart from Cabo Verde to Cape Coast. This is just more work to be done. I'd like to show now some possible ways of considering the relationships, that is the stemmata or family trees of the charts, particularly the Cantino and Carvalho planispheres. The simplest possible relationships between the Cantino and Carvalho planispheres would be something like these. The relationship might be that of mother-daughter, or sisters, or aunt and niece. Of course, if the Carvalho planisphere was derived from the Cantino, additional documentary sources, such as a chart of Brazil from after 1502, would have to be accepted. Now, allowing that the Padrão Real was not just a single fixed world chart, but was a collection of evolving charts that also included a formally embodied master planisphere that was amended and evolved over time. And all were co-located in the Armazém, or in the Palácio de Ribeiro. A simplified stemma or family tree might be something like this. Here in this example is shown the Carvalho planisphere derived from the Cantino as one possibility, or the Carvalho planisphere being an independent sister document from the same sources as the Cantino, or similar sources. And of course, in any stemma, it is possible there were one or more removes or intermediary copies. Perhaps someday a statistician can apply maximum likelihood estimation, Bayesian probability, and other inferential methods to evaluate these possibilities. But today I'm only concerned with the narrower question of whether or not the African place names on the Carvalho planisphere were directly copied from or derived from the Cantino planisphere. For this question, I believe that heuristic methods such as the reasonable use of the principle of parsimony, educated guesses, and common sense are sufficient to provide an answer at present. My conclusions and further considerations. I would like to reiterate that 1/4 of the African place names on the Carvalho planisphere match those on one or more of the other earlier charts, but are missing from the Cantino. I interpret this as a strong indication that the Carvalho planisphere was not copied from nor derived from the Cantino planisphere. Furthermore, beyond the internal evidence of these charts, there is external evidence I'm not discussing today, indicating that the Carvalho planisphere was indeed copied from the Padrão Real. I expect these and other lines of inquiry to debunk the long-held but false belief that the Portuguese cartographer of the Cantino planisphere was bribed by Alberto Cantino, who supposedly then secretly smuggled the chart out of Lisbon. Instead, the Armazém in Lisbon was a global trading zone, openly included foreign craftsmen, such as the Genoese cartographer Niccolò Cavalli, whose copying of the Padrão Real necessarily required his long-term presence in the Armazém and the Casa de India. Perhaps a more definitive answer will be made in some distant future when the genetic makeup of the animal skins of the Carvalho planisphere is determined. That is, whether the parchments of the planisphere are of Iberian or Italian origin. It would appear that the transmission of the newly created geographical knowledge and cartographic standards from Lisbon to Italy and the rest of Europe was above board and not infrequent. The internal evidence we looked at today creates an opening for that possibility to be demonstrated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. Can you please just take your presentation from the shared screen?
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Okay, got it.
Okay, thank you. We have some minutes for questions or comments and any type of observations. Yes, Shima, please.
So thank you for the talk. Very interesting and well-paced. I wanted to ask maybe a very basic question, but it wasn't quite clear to me, and maybe you have an opinion. So to your mind, is the pattern chart really a single sheet that gives huge coverage, parts of which could be selectively copied? Or are planispheres like this a compilation of local pattern charts? I don't know if that's clear, but I'm curious what would be your opinion.
I'd have to say yes to both. I imagine the Padrão Real as a large world map, a world chart, and it being a compilation, reports coming in and then modifications made to that world chart. We see that in the Cantino planisphere itself, where after somebody from the Cabral voyage returned from Brazil and updated with a parchment strip. I imagine at some point enough of these parchment strips are added that finally they say, okay, forget that, get 10 more parchments, glue them together, we'll do another one. And around this all the time are sketches being added to it, charts being drawn from portions of it, because of course in planning voyages to India, they would make separate charts of the South Atlantic, separate charts of the Mozambique Channel, these kinds. Those would be drawn from the master map, the Padrão Real. But again, I'm saying the Padrão Real, in my mind, is one big world chart and all the other charts that are coming and going from it, that are all in the same room, if you will.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to pin you down on that, so I could fully understand what was your idea.
Yeah, my idea is a not well-defined border.
Sure. Thank you.
We have two more questions in line. First, Luis Robles, please.
So thank you, very interesting presentation. I noticed that you selected only Portuguese chart, and then in your final stemma, you kind of proposed that all of them descend from the Padrão Real. And what I was thinking, what about non-Portuguese maps?
Yes.
How about extending the analysis to those charts?
Yeah, I have not looked at them. You know, I'm a human and I have limitations. I haven't looked at them yet. There's a couple of more Portuguese charts to look at and non-Portuguese charts. for example, there's a Juan de la Cosa planisphere. It has fewer place names, and they pretty much match what's already being shown by me. The same with the Portuguese chart in Modena, dated. We're pretty sure it's dated after 1471. We don't know how far after. It's got the same place names. It only adds 10 unique names. It really didn't add anything to my presentation. However, looking at further charts, as you're indicating, would be something I would do, provide in a published paper for a matter of completeness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Wolfgang is with his hand raised. Please, Wolfgang.
Yes, just one thing. It's again, you're pricking the balloon of some myths, and same as with your talk on the other Kunstmann chart. And I think it underlines again the importance of the toponym line of inquiry that we've seen yesterday, and that Tony has been following for many years now. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to add to that about the toponyms and place names. Almost every, I shouldn't say almost every, many times I have seen on the cartometric analyses and today and previous times, the not only the number of place names, questioning whether it's a sufficient number, but sometimes the points that are picked on a chart actually do not represent what we think it represents. It actually represents something else. It's because these place names, they're nomadic, they change. We're never quite sure where explorers went to, and then we think we know. And anyway, I would just say that even though a few place names on an analysis may not make a significant difference to the results of that analysis, it's still not exactly correct. And so anyway, in order to make the correct identifications of place names, one needs to really understand the voyages and how those voyages were recorded and those place names passed on through history. Anyway, just a cautionary note.
We have one more question, which will be the last question. So please, Joaquin, go ahead.
You're muted.
You're muted, Joaquin, yeah.
Always is. Well, first of all, congratulations for your presentation, Greg. I was caught by your arguments, and you were very convincing about the Caveri not being copied from the Cantino, and you base your arguments only in the toponymy, the place names. I know you have other arguments that we're going to present later in other places. I won't be talking about this. Just a short note on one thing. I am convinced, and I have written about it, that the Cantino was not copied directly from the royal pattern because it has too many mistakes on it.
Yeah, well, that's still a good question, whether it was copied from the Pedrauri. See, now, what do we mean by copied? You mean, you're saying copied directly, not copied directly. So the inference being that there may have been one or more intermediary copies.
Yes,
so,
yes,
okay.
I think so.
But
yeah, the mistakes are too important. For example, the distance of the Treaty of Tordesillas is wrong. The distance, the placement of the tropics is wrong. So I believe it was not a direct copy. It does not have a latitude scale, contrarily to the Caveri from this year.
Yeah.
It's just a small point.
Right. Well, I think that's a good question. I see it as a possibility, and when I remind myself that the people drawing the Cantino planisphere were not all mariners and pilots or even cartographers, that there are, as we have generally agreed, there are Flemish miniaturists making drawings on that planisphere. There's nothing in my mind that prevents a Flemish miniaturist drawing a red horizontal line representing the Tropic of Cancer and misplacing it. That would certainly be a possibility. So these are, as we all know, these are collaborative efforts by teams of people, particularly when you're speaking of a large planisphere as this. So errors occur, variations occur, and be they navigational or artistic, we don't know yet. Henrique.
Okay, once again, thank you very much, Greg. Thank you for the presentation. We have to move on, and we will have the third presentation and the last of this, first batch of presentations by Luis Robles, who has just shown us that he's accompanied by a cat, which makes it nicer. But anyway, so Luis Robles, he was trained in engineering, so he's an engineer by formation and training. But as we all know, and we all know him, he's been involved in studies in the history of cartography for a number of years now. Currently, he's a doctoral candidate in history at the Université Libre de Bruxelles, and he's working mostly, and this I think is the topic of his dissertation, on the work and the biography of Juan Vespucci. We know Luis Robles publishes regularly, and we follow his work. So it's a pleasure having you here. Luis, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much for the introduction, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully you see my slides.
It is okay.
Okay. So we all know that medieval portolan charts were mainly made in Venice, in Genoa, and in Majorca. And we have learned that each of these places had a certain set of place names, of toponyms, that they tended to use and that may characterize charts from these places. Today, I'm going to present you a fourth corpus of portolan chart toponyms that was used by chart makers in Portugal and in Castile, specifically in Andalusia, meaning the western half of the Iberian Peninsula. So my first slide aimed to convince people of the importance of toponyms, but I think today the audience is already well aware of this, so I will not spend much time. So toponyms are a large fraction of the informational content of any map. And in portolan charts, they have this characteristic style where they are always written perpendicular to the coast and so on, as we know, with a particular detail that normally there are two categories of place names, the most important and the least important. Normally the most important are written in red and the least important are written in black. There may be charts where the color code changes a bit, but normally that's majoritarily the case. And there has been a lot of scholarship. I said culminating in Tony Campbell's database. Fortunately, scholarship is still going on, and in this conference we have already had very interesting examples. But I will mention this database by Tony Campbell because I've used it a lot for my own research. And when you open Tony's database, it looks like this, and I'm going to use it to explain the concept of what I consider a toponymic novelty and how it leads me to this identification of this West Iberian corpus. So in Tony's database, which can be downloaded from that address, you can find all the portolan chart toponyms from the continuous coastline that goes from northern France all the way around the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, and then back to the Strait of Gibraltar up to the Atlantic coast of Morocco. So he has compiled several thousands of toponyms of every chart authored before 1469 and 166 later charts. So it's a lot of data that has gone into that compilation of toponyms. So for each of them, he gives he records the name as was found in the first charts that used it, which was the first chart. And eventually when the toponym was first written in red, it happens that some toponyms are promoted from black to red over time, and some additional data. So if I focus now here on the region of Lisbon, I can illustrate two examples of we call toponymic novelty. So first of all, the river Tejo, you can see here, it first appears in 1436 on a chart made by Bianco. So it means that in that chart, River Tejo was a novel toponym. It had never been written before, at least in that form. And from that point on, some other map makers may have used it. So it's what I call a novel toponym for the Portolan charts. If I now take Setúbal, Setúbal was already a very old toponym, but only in 1403 did it start to appear in red. So at that point, Beccari made an innovation, which was to write that toponym with a higher importance. And this is what I call the first red. So I have these two types of novelties that I will use in the rest of the presentation, novel toponyms and first reds. So one established fact is that Portolan charts were not in general very innovative, most in terms of toponymy at least. So most of the toponyms were standardized early on in the 14th century, already in the charts by Pietro Visconti. And after that, there have been a limited number of innovations. Each author may have introduced a few of them, some of them a bit more. And in the graph I'm going to show, I have quantified that. This is based on Tony Campbell's database. So I have plotted first charts from the 14th century. The vertical axis shows the number of novel toponyms, and the horizontal axis, it's the first threads. So it means the charts that are top and right are very innovative, and the charts that are close to the zero are very little innovative. So you can see that in the 14th century, there were at least 3 quite innovative charts, mainly Dall'Orto, which is very close in time to Pietro Visconti. So it's still maybe what we could call the formative period of the standard toponym corpus for Portolan charts. And then the innovation slows down a bit. In the 15th century, you have 3-4 charts that can be considered very innovative, whereas the rest tend to be of very modest innovation. And finally, in the 16th century, they all cluster towards zero. There is very little introduction of new toponyms, at least based on what Tony Campbell's current database tells us. So it's kind of, the corpus gets more or less frozen, and it's just repeated over time. So based on this, as Henrique said, I started to study a particular chart. Oh, sorry, I go back to this slide because this is another established fact that we have and that I wanted to mention. As I said, there are 3 main production centers of medieval Portolan charts: Venice, Genoa, and Majorca. And Tony Campbell and Ramon Pujades and other authors have identified toponyms that can be associated with each of these 3 centers, specifically red toponyms that can be found only, for example, in Venetian charts. So I have here the number, and the list can be found in Tony Campbell's database. So based on these clusters of red toponyms, on these lists of red toponyms, one can more or less assess if an anonymous chart contains only red names that are associated with Venetian origin. One can more or less conclude that the chart is probably Venetian. It's a way to propose a geographical origin. So this is, as I said, another quite well understood fact about Portolan chart toponyms. So as I said, I came to this issue from the analysis of this particular chart, the Juan Vespucci 1520 Portolan chart that was presented already Wednesday when Annabelle presented the chemical analysis that have been done on it. So I transcribed all the toponyms, I counted them, and then I asked 2 questions. First, how original was this chart? How innovative? In that scale that I showed, is it like all 16th century charts, very close to the zero of innovation, or is it a bit more original? And if I have to connect it to one of these 3 geographical origins, which corpus does it use? Does it use the Catalan corpus because it's closer geographically to Seville? Or does it use a Venetian corpus or a Genoese corpus because Juan Vespucci was Italian, so maybe he brought some tradition from there? So those were my starting questions. So I set out to analyze these toponyms, and what I found was that this chart contained a strikingly high number of innovations. So I plotted them here, the crosses are novel toponyms and the dots are first reds. So I found it contained a lot of them and all over the place. So when I plotted this back on the graph I showed, Vespucci's chart would be there. So it would be not only the most innovative chart of the entire 16th century, but also one of the most innovative ever. And to me, it didn't really make sense. I mean, why would this be? Why this exceptional behavior? And then I went back to the basis, to the hypothesis that I had used in this analysis. And then I went to the list of charts that have been used to build Tony Campbell's database. And I realized that very few of them were from Seville. I mean, actually, none of them was from Seville. And very few were from Portugal or from places close to Seville. There were many Catalan charts, but none from that part of the Iberian Peninsula where Vespucci worked or with which he might have more relationship. So I set out and said, okay, what if I analyze contemporary charts of this one to see how they perform? Do I see this innovation in this chart? Do they even have the same toponyms as Vespucci? So I did that. I started with Jorge Aguiar, this oldest dated Portuguese chart. And I found that it contained a lot of toponymic innovations, but many of them were also present in Vespucci. So this meant that Vespucci was not that innovative. Many of his apparent innovations were already here 3 decades earlier. And somehow there was a connection between the two maps. So I repeated the analysis with other charts, with the Cantino Planisphere, with Juan de la Cosa's Planisphere, with Reynel's undated chart, but which probably lies somewhere between the Cantino Planisphere and 1520. So I did those analyses, and every time I found the same thing. Many innovations in every chart, many of them also present in the other ones, in Vespucci, in Cantino, in Juan de la Cosa. So overall, what that led me was to conclude, I mean, when I took into account all those precedents and I went back to Juan Vespucci, if I remove now all the apparent innovations that were already present in those earlier charts, what I found was that it was not that innovative. That most of the innovations were in fact already present on other charts since 2 decades or 3 decades earlier. So when I plotted that, I went back to that graph I showed earlier. First, the Vespucci chart has come down close to the origin. It's no longer that innovative. It's more or less average for its century. What one now sees is that the Juan de la Cosa Planisphere, the Cantino, and especially Jorge Aguiar's chart look extremely innovative. So what is happening here? Of course, the problem has been transferred. We now have found the precedents of Vespucci's chart, so it doesn't look innovative anymore. What we don't have is which are the precedents of the Cantino Planisphere or of Jorge Aguiar, because we don't have extant earlier charts, or at least earlier charts that can be dated accurately. And so I did not include them in this analysis. But of course, I imagine that if we had them, if we had a Portuguese chart from precisely 1485 that we could analyze and add to this list, it would remove a lot of the innovations in Jorge Aguiar, who would become less innovative comparatively. And then that other chart would seem to have a lot of innovation in it. So what this leads me to observe as well is that these innovations are not independent, they are very connected. And so I have here some statistics. When I look at all these charts I analyzed, I found a total of 400 toponymic innovations, I would say apparently introduced by map makers in Portugal or in Castile at the turn of the 16th century. So a toponymic innovation sometimes may be shaky, especially when it's a novel toponym, because sometimes you may think it's a slip of the pen, it's a corruption. So there is a room for randomness, for coincidence. So I focused on a more select group of innovations, which are used in at least 2 different charts that are consistent in their spelling, or generally speaking, that appear in 2 of these charts, and that also have never been seen in earlier charts or in later charts made in the Mediterranean, in Majorca, in Venice, in Genoa, etc. And so with that more restrictive definition, I still find around 100 toponymic innovations. So that 100 is what I call the West Iberian corpus of toponyms. It's a corpus, and I don't know how it was embodied, but somehow all these authors drew from that common corpus and used them to different extents for their works. One important observation that connects with Greg's presentation is that I have not found any evidence of direct copying among these charts. If you take any stretch of the Mediterranean coast, or the Atlantic coast for that matter, you can never find a perfect coincidence from one to the other. There is always several toponyms that are missing in one, the later one adds new things, and then a toponym disappears for 20 years and resurfaces later. So there is no way to build a stemma of charts based on these toponyms. It all looks as if they somehow feed on a common corpus. As I said, I'm at a loss to explain exactly how that was embodied. And just for your information, I have plotted here where these innovations are located. So what we can see is that they are mainly on the western half of the map. So the Atlantic facade and the western basin of the Mediterranean. A few in the eastern Mediterranean, mainly first threads, not that many novel toponyms, and very few in the Black Sea, which kind of makes sense because you could expect that these innovations may somehow reflect first-hand knowledge of these coasts. And we don't know of many West Iberian mariners who sailed in the Black Sea. So this is quite consistent with that. So based on this, what I propose is that on top of these three known corpora of toponyms, I propose a fourth one here that was exclusively used by Portuguese and Castilian map makers. So there's the so what, no? So there are some follow-up questions. So the first one is about the solidity of this theory, and I will present a study I did to assess how solid is all this. Then the other questions are, okay, what can we use this knowledge for? So one is, can we use it to attribute anonymous charts to identify their geographical origin? And another thing is, what does this tell us about the origin of chart making in Portugal and in Andalusia, which is not a very well-known part of history today. So to answer the first question about how solid this is, I did the exercise of analyzing two charts. One is a 1489 chart made in Mallorca, which is not in Tony Campbell's database. So it was to check, does it already contain some of these West Iberian toponyms? So was there any mixing of toponyms from one side of the Iberian Peninsula to the other? And the other chart I used was the Estense, the one in Modena that was mentioned earlier as well, an unsigned Portuguese chart. We don't know from when. We know it's later than 1471, but other than that, the date is unclear. But we are pretty sure it's Portuguese. So I wanted to check, even if this presumably old chart already contained these toponyms from this corpus. So I wrote the results there. So first of all, the Bertrand is much richer in toponymy. It covers the entire Mediterranean, so there are more than 1,000 toponyms on it. But when I first looked for these red names that are only Venetian or only Catalan. So Bertrand contains a lot of only Catalan names and only one Venetian. So this is kind of an anomaly, but it can be expected. Our corpora or analysis are not 100% perfect, but it's a strong indication that it's a Catalan chart, as of course it is. The Estense does not have any. And then when I checked their toponyms with what I call the exclusive West Iberian toponyms, that set of 100 toponyms that are only used by several West Iberian map makers, Bertrand has one. It's true. I would have expected 0, but it has 1. Okay, again, we learned that there may be some small errors in these categories. But the Estense has 12, and 12 means almost 7% of all its toponyms have never been found in any chart made elsewhere than Portugal and Seville, for that matter, or Andalusia. So that's a strong indication that the Estense chart is a West Iberian chart, as we know it is. But to me, this test was something that lends weight to my method and to my results. Then I applied it to a question that I was asking myself. So what is the origin of the Torino planisphere? We all think it's somehow based on cartography made in Seville, but its style is quite different. I mean, its artistic style is quite different from any extant chart made there. So could it be a chart made in Italy, for example, out of information collected in the Iberian Peninsula, but by local craftsmen or with local data for the Mediterranean? So I analyzed the Mediterranean, and what I saw is that I found 38 cases of these exclusive toponyms of West Iberia, which again is close to 7%, 6 to 7%. And again, it's a strong indication that it has that origin with only 2 Venetian and red names. So very little indication that it comes from Venice for that matter. So my conclusion is that at least that section of the map, the Mediterranean, is based on a map made in West Iberia. It was not made on an Italian Portolan chart. It was made on a map that came from Seville, if it was not actually made in Seville itself. I have tried to build I would not call it a statistical analysis, but I have tried to identify indicators within the corpus of novelties or toponymic characteristics that appear in almost all West Iberian charts, so as to use them as a quick test to look at other maps, to see if an unknown, I mean, a chart of which we don't really know anything about its author, can we check quickly to see if it's West Iberian or not, without going through the entire transcription of 1,000 toponyms, which can be quite time consuming. I will not go into detail into this in detail now in the interest of time, but we can talk about it later in the questions and answers if you want. And finally, I tried to probe the origin of this corpus. So first I plotted in that chart, which I think needs some explanation. This is the chart I showed before of the red names that are specific to Venetian, Genoese, or Catalan charts. I plotted the results for the Bertrand chart that I showed. So the results that could be expected from a Majorcan chart. So very high in Catalan red names, very high in Catalan and Genoese red names. That's a shared category, and very low in Venetian names. So I did the same for all the West Iberian charts I have analyzed, and I found those results. So it's not that clear to conclude, but I would say they tend to be more like Catalan charts than, for example, Venetian charts. So this could be consistent with the common belief that Portuguese charts somehow stem from Majorcan charts. This is more or less the established theory today, even though there is not that much hard evidence for that, but it's the common belief. Still, as we have seen, even for the earliest Portuguese charts, there is already a neat difference with the Catalan corpus of toponyms. And given that innovation is typically slow in this matter, in toponyms, to me that raises the questions of when did Portuguese charts or Castilian charts diverge from that Catalan tradition from which they supposedly come? Was it, from this I know it was not in 1470, for example, because otherwise it would be, to me, too early, too close to this clear separation, but when did that divergence happen? So I leave the question for others who may want to explore it. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Luis. Can you please just take your screen, the shared screen?
Yeah.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. So if there are any questions or comments, we have some minutes.
Oh dear.
So I think Joaquim raised his hand, so go ahead, Joaquim.
Okay, thank you very much, Luis, for your presentation. I was absolutely fascinated by your presentation because I see, I see an avenue of research from here. For example, you asked the questions, was the Portuguese cartography really descendant from the Catalan cartography? Yes. Yes, this is a way to prove or to disprove that. And I will ask other questions. How far is the Atlantic Spanish school of cartography related to either the Portuguese or the Catalan school. Our present interpretation is that it derives mainly from the Portuguese cartography school. But can you verify that using just the place names? Okay, that was a comment. Now, a question. Why is that the Western Mediterranean started to show innovative place names collected by the Iberian people? It doesn't appear to make much sense. Is that a reflex of the decline of the, well, Italian and Catalan cartography?
Okay, so there are two very interesting questions. On the first one, I would say that not only based on toponyms, but based on other matters like style, like the way that other territories are represented. For me, there's a very strong connection between Andalusia and Portugal in terms of map making in around 1500, and not that much of a connection with Majorca or with the Catalan-speaking area. And it makes sense because there was a lot of exchange of people between these two places. You have people like Amerigo Vespucci, who first worked in Seville and then moved to Lisbon and then went back to Seville. And you have Diego Ribeiro, who was Portuguese and moved to Spain to work there. You have Juan de la Cosa, who of course was active in Spain, but was sent to Portugal on a kind of espionage mission. So the border was very porous and people moved and there was a lot of exchange and a lot of connection. And you don't really find that, at least in terms of cartography, with Majorcan map makers who, to me, are quite isolated from Seville over this time. There is only maybe this Jaime Ferrer in the late 15th century, 1490s, who was a cosmographer, and he was asked for advice by the monarchs. He was Catalan, and he may have made some kind of map. So that could be maybe the only connection I have seen, but it's much less than the other one, between Seville and Lisbon, or Portugal and Andalusia in general. So on that part, I'm pretty clear. The second question I forgot. Sorry, what was the second question?
Well, about how do we explain that the novel names in the West of the Mediterranean have an Iberian origin? That is strange, is it not?
Yeah. On that one, I don't have an answer. I don't know why this may have happened. I have the list of toponyms that are novel, and we could try to, from maybe the 20 toponyms that are novel in that region, try to determine why they may have surfaced at least in that period of time, and is there any particular reason why it happened in West Iberia only and not in Majorca, where one could expect that kind of innovation to appear. Yeah, I agree. That's a good question.
Thank you. So Tony raised his hand. Please, Tony. Yeah, another question. You are muted, Tony.
Okay,
excellent.
Yes, first of all, a very, very big congratulations, Luis. I'm delighted to hear all of that, and I'm waiting to see the full publication because I think this is very important. I would just to explain very briefly the way that I operated, which was not in any kind of a linear direction. I started off by, when I was asked to write the chapter in the 1987 book, and I just was trying to gather information on which I could understand the general situation. And having done what I could do back in the 1980 or so, without many reproductions and so on, and I did restrict it to dated maps, charts rather than other. So, and then I added things afterwards later on. So in a sense, it's a hybrid and it's a bit of a mess, but that was just the way it was. But so I'm delighted to see your much more rigorous approach to this, and it's a very important discovery. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment? Greg, yes.
My middle name is on mute. Luis, if I understand almost all of your place names were derived from Tony's excellent Excel spreadsheet. Those are all pre-1500 place names from Portland charts, correct? And your Vespucci chart is 2 decades after that.
No, not really, not really. Tony's database, I mean, he's here. He could probably explain it better than me, but he extended it with charts from later periods. So after 1469, so you find charts by the Mayolos, you find charts by, I don't know, a lot of map makers in the 16th century and in the 17th century, down to, for example, Teixeira, one Teixeira in the 17th. So no, it goes well beyond 1500, but it's not comprehensive after 1500, which of course is understandable.
So there may still be charts in the first 2 decades of the 16th century, which could have a meaningful impact on what you're doing right now.
Yes. For example, I mean, you've worked a lot with the Kunstmann 3. That's a chart I have not analyzed in detail. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's West Iberian. When I look at these indicators, it's quite obvious that it's West Iberian, but I have not quantified it, and I have not added its toponyms to the corpus, just for one reason, because we are not that certain about the date. So I didn't know whether to put it before the Cantino Planisphère or after it. So it kind of complicated my study because I wanted to quantify how innovative each of these charts looked. And for this one, I don't really know.
Well, there's an article appearing shortly by Joki and myself indicating the Kunstmann 3 is initially produced in 1501 and then modified afterwards. More of that detail to that dating will appear in a follow-on article in the future. But anyway, the place names of the Med C are on the Kunstmann 3 are probably 1501.
Okay.
I think we have the another question by Andrew, which I think it will be the last one, and then we will stop here. So please, Andrew, go forward.
Okay, I was interested just on, I think it was the first slide you had, where there seemed to be a very high percentage of red letter names. My own experience looking at the Aegean or on the western seaboard of Greece is that we have a relatively low percentage of red names. And I wonder to what extent you had, how shall I say, corrected for the level of percentage of red names in each of the charts in your overall analysis. Now, maybe I wasn't understanding it, but that was just a reaction.
Yeah. No, that's a thoughtful comment, and it's not that easy because it varies a lot. I mean, the same region can have different approaches by different map makers. Some of them put a lot of red names, others don't. So there's not a straightforward answer. But there is one case where it is quite obvious that something needs to be, I will not say corrected, but it's the George Aguiar chart. If you remember the slide I showed with the results, it has a lot of first reds because it has a lot of red toponyms. I mean, it's unusual in that sense. So for some reason, I don't know why, maybe he only had red ink left, I don't know, but for some reason he added a lot of red names to that chart. And that comes as a bit of an anomaly. That's why all those red names, I counted them, are part of the corpus, but if they don't appear in later charts by other map makers, I don't consider part of the West Iberian corpus. I only consider them kind of a specific anomaly of that chart and not part of a broader thing.
Okay, thanks.
Well, thank you very much. I think we should stop here, but I would, before going, would like to thank the 3 speakers. I mean, we had a delightful series of presentations filled with novel ideas and so many exciting suggestions. So thank you very much to the 3 of them.